Courtney, can you click, or Dorothy, can you click record? Thank you. Okay, so we're also going to use a Google Doc to share and to communicate and to sort of share and record. That Google Doc is in the chat window, so if you haven't already, if you can please click that to open it up. If you have any issues there, just let Courtney know and she'll make sure to get you to that Google Doc. All right, and again, we want to, like on Monday, we want to welcome you to participate at whatever level is most comfortable for you. Okay, so in thinking through how we might close our semester with equity in mind, we have identified 3 practices for you to consider. And let me move forward on the slide. All right, so this first one is going to focus more on the final exams, whatever, the final exam, the final projects, or the final papers, whatever is that sort of big, oftentimes it's a big assignment or activity that you have for students at the end of the semester. And we want to, we want to just bring into the conversation what I think we all know is that for our students, they're experiencing a reduced cognitive and affective bandwidth, right? Many of the stressors that our students are encountering are out of our control, right? Out of our control. And that could be anything from the disappointments that they're trying to process in terms of, in terms of their job prospects or internships. I mean, it's a range. Their disappointments about maybe about their own relationships. But the things that they're encountering that are out of their control, these disappointments, the job market, their health. But as instructors, we can think through how some of the decisions we're making might potentially be creating additional stressors for students. So just be mindful that, yes, there are things that are out of our control, but there are things that we can think through and adapt in an equity-focused way. And so here are some strategies that might help in terms of boosting a student's bandwidth in this moment when they're experiencing all of this overload and stress. So we want to encourage all instructors to give students ample time, a very long window to complete whatever that exam is, whatever that project is, or paper. And there's a number of reasons why you want to provide students with a very large, a very lengthy time to complete these things. You want to take in consideration time zones, right? So we have students who are not in the same time zone that we are, that can be, across the globe. I also want to remind folks that, Ramadan started last night, and so our Muslim students who are practicing, they may be fasting, they may be staying up late to do prayers at night. And so Ramadan creates some additional sort of challenges to meeting, to sort of being able to work promptly. So we also might want to think that the sort of stress of these conditions means that students just have slower recall, right? They're processing information slower than they normally would be. Their recall is slower. This sort of cognitive overload, the lack of sleep, these mental health challenges. I've also heard from my students that many of them have started working. They've picked up jobs during this time, and that these jobs, the jobs that they're working are, the students that I've been speaking to have been service jobs. So they're working at grocery stores and those sorts of things. And so they're not always able to control, their hours. And so just think about why it might be supportive to provide, ample time for students to complete these exams or projects or papers. And you also might want to think about how the student might be in a home environment that doesn't support really positive test-taking conditions. And so the student might need to take themselves to a place where they can take the exam, right? And then think about it, what kind of challenges that would be. I had mentioned at another Zoom conference that I had met with some students who in their car. And I didn't want to pry and ask why I was meeting with them in their car, but it made me think about, what was it about, maybe their home that didn't make that environment best for meeting with me via Zoom. So we want to encourage you to provide ample time for whatever final exam, final project. To be specific here, I've heard faculty and colleagues say, oh yeah, I'm giving them twice the amount of time to complete the exam. Normally it's an hour, I'm going to give them 2 hours. I actually think that we need to really expand that and think about giving them 24 hours or longer if we're going to take seriously some of these challenges. We also want to increase transparency right now in terms of the purpose of the assignments or the exams that we're giving. Make it clear to students why they're doing the work that they're doing. Students are saying that they're, are struggling to be motivated. They also feel like they've been given lots of busy work right now. So make clear what it is that you're, why it is that you have created this exam or paper or project for them. And then, we know that universal design for learning, teaches us that students need very transparent instructions and evaluation rubrics. So here's a moment where we can really be very specific and detailed in our instructions to students for these exams, for these papers and projects. We could also just think about how distracted our students are and why they would very much appreciate and benefit from very detailed instruction. So the sorts of things that we would just sort of assume that our students know, maybe right now is a moment where we do want to write out our instructions in a really clear way. And we also might want to consider providing those rubrics to them before they even begin the work, right? Letting them know how they're going to be evaluated. That we know will reduce the stress of taking on these finals. If we tell them up front how they're going to be evaluated, they'll know where to focus their work. And so this, again, is just helping to boost their bandwidth. In terms of, so this next one is about allowing access to aids. What we'd ask is that faculty consider allowing students to rely on support materials as they're taking their final exams. That might be books and notes, but it might also be something like the internet, which is something that we tend not to allow students to access during final exams. And why is it that we want to do this? Is you might just want to think again about the stress of the situation and how it's creating a barrier to organized thinking and recall for our students. And so allowing them to have the support materials seems incredibly reasonable considering the circumstances. If you're concerned about cheating or plagiarism or any sort of honor code violation, right now is the time to be explicitly clear to your students on what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Whether they're allowed to get outside support from tutors or from parents, right? I know this week I got I think a student sent me the wrong draft of their paper, which had track changes from their father, right? So make clear what kind of support they can get, what sort of materials that they could rely on. Can they rely on proofreaders? Again, making clear what is allowed and what's not allowed, and giving students this long window to complete the exam and to access these support materials is going to reduce the sort of pressure that a student might feel to maybe do something that would violate the honor code. We know that students most often cheat when they're backed up against the wall, right? When they're not prepared and they don't think they have enough time to catch up. That's when students cheat. It's under that sort of pressure. And I think that the circumstances have absolutely created that pressure right now, right? They're probably, I feel incredibly behind in everything. I imagine my students feel behind in everything as well. Dorothy, do you want to talk about how you can create this study guide?
So yeah, one way of relieving some of the stress of understanding the task and also how to study is making time, if you have another class or asynchronously, to either provide a study guide or asking students to create a study guide collaboratively. So you could provide headers for particular sections of material that you would like them to review and ask them to contribute and maybe be able to use it during the exam or the paper. So this could also actually hold true for rubrics, right? If you transparency in various measures is the main message here. If you have student work, past student work, papers, final projects, now's the time to actually share those and discuss them with your students to make crystal clear what it is you want them to focus on. The last point is about promoting good metacognitive and meta-affective strategies. And this is a lot of common sense things that may be hard to remember for our students, or there are things that particularly our marginalized students have not been hearing or practicing during their high school and college careers. So you might want to remind them that it might be helpful before they take an exam to be clearing their workspace and only having the books and materials ready that they can access, making sure that the room is aired and they take a break before they actually start, and that what the break, a good break could look like making sure you have enough water and food beforehand, and maybe water at your desk as you're taking the exam. It also might, you might point them to the fact that we are all struggling with motivation and positivity around our tasks right now, and that if they feel frustrated while they are taking an exam, then closing the computer for a moment, stepping outside, maybe even taking a short power nap, that these might all be strategies to help them stay on focus, have as clear a brain as they can have, and then also monitor their attitudes and just realizing that there are small things they can do to reset, press the reset button. For those of you who have participated in any learning communities around contemplative pedagogy, you might even remind them of a piece they can do to basically tell themselves it's okay and I can continue after taking a break. So things like this.
All right, thanks. So we're going to move on to a second strategy for you to consider. I actually can't see my slide. Did it move forward to the next one? Okay, great. All right, so we have this really, this tricky situation in front of us, which is, as much as we can think through the sorts of challenges and conditions that our students are working with, ultimately, because the conditions of the situation are constantly changing, we're not going to be able to predict or estimate the sorts of needs that our students have, right? So how can we support students when we can't anticipate their needs? And how can we allow students to communicate their needs without requiring self-disclosure? So just to provide a little bit more context for that second question. So oftentimes our students, particularly our marginalized students, they feel like they feel intimidated to speak to a professor and ask for some sort of accommodation, right? A lot of times they don't even know that that's something that they can do, but they feel intimidated by that because they feel like as if they're going to have to disclose personal information that they maybe don't feel great about, or that's not something that they necessarily want to share, or that's not how they want the professor to think of them. And so they hesitate to have these conversations, and you know, it ends up meaning that the professor just doesn't necessarily know that that's a need that needs to be met, and the student doesn't get that need met. So how can we facilitate some communication with our students so that they can share with us what they need to be successful right now, without requiring them to you know, allowing them some privacy here? So what we'd suggest here is that you create a communication channel, a clear, hopefully that went forward, is that you create a clear feedback channel, and that you make that available to all of your students. You remind them of that feedback channel often, so that they know that it's available. They know how to access that channel, and that you also make explicit that if they have a need right now that needs to be met, that they can come to you and share it and share what that need is. But that's not going to require them to share, you know, all this personal information. It's not going to require that sort of self-disclosure. And I would encourage faculty to say that explicitly to students. They need to hear that, right? Which is, I care, I want to make sure that I'm creating an accessible classroom. I'm probably not going to be able to anticipate all of your needs. Please tell me what it is that you need. And that doesn't mean you have to share with me what's going on in your life or anything personal like that. You never have to share anything that you don't want to. In terms of what that clear, you know, that clear feedback channel could be, it could be, you know, office hours. It could even be in a an assignment, it could be email, but just again, making, clear to students that this is a channel, that this is important to you, and it doesn't require any self-disclosure. Again, this is all about building up students so that they can advocate for themselves, and making clear your commitment to an equity focused, an equitable classroom, and an accessible learning and learning experience to students. Was there more to add on to this one, Dorothy?
I don't think so.
Yeah, all right. So we'll move on to our last strategy here, and this has to do with grading. So this is again so thorny, but I think right now is the time that we need to talk about equity and grading with our students and to have very sort of transparent conversations with them. I think we need to remind students that their grades are not their worth, and the grade isn't a reflection of their ability. We know that traditional grades are most often a reflection of how well a student is prepared for that learning experience, and how much support they get during that learning experience, right? So I think now is the time that we remind students that grades, that they're not their grades. I have this conversation with my students, and I have a lot of students of color, and I just think this is really important for them to hear. I do think our more marginalized students, they process, they experience grading slightly different than some of our other students. What I'm hearing from some faculty is that faculty are making commitments that they are not going to give their students a grade that is lower than what they had earned before spring break, right? That they are making this commitment that they're not going to give students a grade that is lower than what they earned before spring break, making sure that they're not sort of punishing students for, whatever happened after spring break. I also know that some faculty are making that commitment, but they're not necessarily sharing it with their students because they don't feel sort of protected or supported to share that out. And that creates this other dilemma where that students might be stressed out, right? They might be really concerned about their grades. So this is, I think you should do whatever you feel comfortable, whatever, however you feel supported. But I think making clear to students how you're going to be evaluating them is going to reduce some of the stress here. I was reading something that was written by some colleagues at JMU, and they'd written this up, and they said, like, what exactly are we evaluating at the end of this semester? So what are we evaluating? So typically our grades are supposed to be some sort of measure of our students' learning. But in this crisis, student performance might not be a reflection of their learning, but rather what they call the extent of the traumatization more than their learning, right? So in this moment when we're thinking about, like, we're assigning this grade, what does this grade really reflect? Is it their learning? Is it their performance? Or is it their ability to learn and perform in this crisis? Are we really measuring and assigning a grade to their trauma? Again, I think that even if you don't, I personally have a lot of uncertainty, and I don't have a ton of confidence in terms of how I'm grading, but I have tried to share that with students to let them know that I feel this tension here, that I'm struggling to find a model or a system that is fair and reasonable. And I think those conversations are important. Dorothy, what would you like to add here? About the credit, no credit, maybe?
So yeah, I mean, many of us are familiar with the conversations and the debates about credit, no credit, and the lack of a clear statement from the institution that really this is not about the grade at this point in time, but this is about acknowledging that we are all doing our very best. I am curious to hear from you later on what your experience is with students' questions around the credit, no credit option. Some professors have very clear conversations with their students, but I would be prepared to be having a conversation if a student comes to you in the next week or so before the final or just right after the final exam, who is not sure about whether to actually sign up for the grade now that they're kind of you know, that they're in limbo about what their grade will be. So thinking that through would be my recommendation. So having a philosophy or thinking through your answer with colleagues, maybe in your department, would be probably not a bad idea.
Thank you. All right, we do have a few minutes here just to hear any feedback, any questions, any issues that anyone would like to raise. If you could please use the little icon of raising your hand or just signaling something, and then we can call your name and you can unmute. But any of the sort of practices that we shared here, do you have any thoughts, something you want to share, any issues or concerns? Yeah, Shilpa, please.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say that the deadline for signing up for Credit No Credit, it starts today and it ends, I just put a message, and it ends on Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. And so if you're going to be getting questions, they're going to be coming this weekend and they're going to be coming on Monday and Tuesday. And once and I've told students too that, you know, you should have honest conversations with your faculty if you want to know if you're taking it for a grade. So just FYI. And the provost has said that once that stops, that's the deadline. It's a firm deadline.
Yeah. Thanks so much for adding that. I've had a couple of conversations with students where I think they think I know more about this than they do in terms of the timing. So I've been directing them to the website that has everything really written out and just sort of walking them through. I've been sort of surprised that some of the students who have come to me to ask questions, because I think that they're having a difficult time processing this. It's just so new to them. So even like reminding them of the dates would be helpful right now, pointing them to the different sorts of resources and the different ways the university has communicated it to them through, like, you know, through written language and then also through figure and charts. Anyone else have anything that they'd like to share now? If you'd put up your hand. All right, so I'm not seeing anyone. Are you seeing anyone, Dorothy? No? All right, so what we'd like to do now is direct you to the Google Doc, and we'd like there to use that as an opportunity to sort of collect the sorts of, you know, challenges that are emerging as you are wrapping up the end of the semester. So if you go over to the Google Doc, find a space to write there under challenges and concerns. The prompt, what challenges have come up to you as you're